how is it that we as vSphere users can interact with the environment so that we can manage our ESXi hosts and their connectivity to storage and to networks and the virtual machines that they manage and all of those sorts of things? What we're going to do here is we're going to focus on a piece of software that runs in vCenter Server called the vSphere client. So as I run here on my desktop system, and I want to eventually manage my ESXi hosts and my virtual machines, we're going to notice that there are a number of systems that allow us to do this. Okay? The first is the vSphere client. The vSphere client runs here on vCenter Server. It's a Tomcat-based web server that gives us access to the entire environment. It gives us access to all of the ESXi hosts and all of the virtual machines that they run, to all of the storage that all of the hosts can see, to all of the virtual networks that we have created, and so on. Okay? So because this vSphere client is based in a web server running in vCenter Server, what we're going to do is we're going to point our desktop to vCenter Server's fully qualified domain name. We're actually going to have this in DNS, right? And we will see here the vSphere client. Now, we also have a system that allows us to interact with vCenter Server called PowerCLI. This is a set of modules that plug into Microsoft's PowerShell that allow us to, once again, interact both with both with vCenter, but also with ESXi directly. So if you want to automate using PowerCLI and scripting, you're more than welcome to do that. Now, in order to have vCenter up and running, we have to have an ESXi host up and running, because vCenter itself is just a piece of software that runs like any other piece of software in a virtual machine. So as we begin to build our environment, we may want to interact directly with an ESXi host to configure it. So every single ESXi host also has a little mini built-in web server. And you're going to be able to point your browser to that web server by pointing to the fully qualified domain name of your ESXi host. Okay? And there you can access what we call the VMware host client. Now the host client only gives us access to the host that we are pointing at, its configuration, and its virtual machines. Okay? For the most part, if we have scaled beyond a single host, right, we want vCenter Server and we want to point to the vSphere client running here on the vCenter Server so that we can manage multiple ESXi hosts. But just in case, just in case vCenter is down for some reason and we can't get it back up and running, and we're going to talk all about the different ways to protect vCenter in the environment, right? So we should not have that issue, but just in case. Or if we want to manage a host directly, then the host client is always there running on your ESXi hosts. There's also another tool called ESXCLI, and this is a command line tool that runs on. Let's try that again. We also want to finally talk about another tool called ESXCLI. Now this is a tool that both runs on your ESXi hosts, but it's also available for installation in Windows or Linux machines that allows us to remotely, both locally or remotely, access an ESX shell. Okay? So there's a shell that runs on ESXi. There's all kinds of really nice tools. It's kind of like the one single command to manage ESXi itself. Right? So that's also available for us if we want to manage a single ESXi host itself. Now, all of these systems need to communicate in some sort of secure fashion. When it comes to, let's try that again. Now, all of these systems need to communicate in some sort of secure fashion. So if you head over to ports.vmware.com, you'll see the network connectivity that exists between your desktop, between vCenter Server, between vCenter Server and the ESXi hosts, and all of these different components. Most of them run on port 443, which entails things like CA-signed certificates and the like. If you're interested in certificate management, you can actually attend our Optimize and Scale course, well, we'll actually do a little bit of a deep dive into certificate management in ESXi and vCenter Server. So let's have a look at some of these different components. We're going to start out with the host client, because this is the first client that you'll likely interact with in a brand new greenfield environment. Now I'm going to install ESXi, and in the next set of videos here, we're going to show you the installation of ESXi, which is all command-based. It's not a graphic interface, for example, to install ESXi itself. But once ESXi is installed, I should be able to point a browser to that ESXi host and its fully qualified domain name that I'll put in DNS, right? And access my host client itself. You'll see that it's in the fully qualified domain of ESXi with a /UI, UI for user interface, at the end. Okay? So this allows me just to manage that single ESXi host and the way that it communicates with storage and networking and so on. Now the vSphere client runs on vCenter Server. So in order to access the vSphere client, of course, vCenter Server needs to be installed in its virtual appliance that runs on an ESXi host, okay? And it's got to be up and running. And you'll access the vSphere client. Once again, this is how we manage vCenter and all of the systems that it manages. Multiple hosts, all of the networks, all of the virtual machines in your larger environment, and so on. Point to the fully qualified domain name of vCenter Server /UI, and you'll be able to access the vSphere client. Both of these systems, by the way, are HTML5 based, so there's no requirement for any sort of browser-based plugin like Flash or anything like that in the environment. Now, both PowerCLI and ESXCLI are command line interfaces that allow us to interact with the environment. Now, PowerCLI is built as a set of modules on top of PowerShell, okay? And it provides us a way into vSphere, into vCenter and ESXi through the vSphere API, which really, for the most part, allows us to execute all of the commands and get all of the information back from vCenter and ESXi that we could possibly want. There's 700 plus commandlets in this environment for managing and automating your entire vSphere environment. Now, ESXCLI, on the other hand, is a remote management of just a single ESXi host. Okay? Now, you can download ESXCLI at a website called code.vmware.com. Okay? It's also baked into the standard ESXi installation, but there are Windows and Linux versions of this that you can download and externally run those against your ESXi hosts. You can do this in order to manage the entire environment. For the most part, there's an ESXCLI command to do just about everything. And that does it for us for our short lesson on the user interfaces that we have access to and the different options that we have in managing this environment. When we come back, we're going to have a look at ESXi itself, and we'll show you how to install ESXi on a host of your own.